Hey, this week, Broadcom cuts us a deal for running VMware for personal use. Then there's the Distro Hopper Corner looking at RescueZilla. We free the llama. Linux 6.9 is out with some cool stuff. Ubuntu is already talking about 2410. And Debian makes a questionable decision when it comes to KeePass XC. Oh yeah, and Raspberry Pi now has the official NVMe hats for the Pi 5. It's all good. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 152, recorded Saturday, May 18th. Rhymes with Breadcat. Hey everybody, it is Saturday, and you know what that means. It's time to get geeky with Linux, all things open source, and yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not just me. We've got the whole crew here, as you can see. We've got Rob, we've got Ken, we've got Jeff, and yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun today. We have a question. Actually, we're going to start real quick with a question from the chat room. This is going to be an interesting way to go. Rocco Sharp says, I'm curious. He says, I've been acting on some of the tips, but you know, the whole easier to ask forgiveness than permission thing, which careful with that one. I'm sure if I asked in the office, I would be told. So if I asked in the office, I would be told, don't explore. If for no other reason than folks can CYA, protect themselves. Where I work, we have terrific Linux enthusiasts in the IT area. But I'm curious, is there some basic checking I can do to gain a bit of confidence I'm not creating a security type of thing? I believe it means a security problem. And that's an interesting question. And I would say, generally speaking, put Linux on a spare machine, an old laptop, or even a virtual machine, and dive in there. That way you kind of can whet your appetite and start looking around and poking at things without causing problems at work. And it's also interesting if your ISP will allow you to do something like running your own little web host and connecting that to the internet and giving it, port forwarding so that people can get to it if they want to. I don't know. Maybe the next thing I would try to do is like instead of a little Mastodon server with a dynamic DNS address, I would approach it in that direction rather than going and messing around with the servers at work. But I bet Rob has thoughts on this because Rob has servers at work and maybe touches them from time to time. What advice do you have for Rocco Sharp?
I mean, you pretty much covered everything I was going to say. Put it on a VM. I don't do any of that testing on any of the production machines at work. I do have a semi-production, not important machine that maybe I do a little bit on, but it's one of those that if the thing breaks and goes on fire, it's not a huge thing, and it's also somewhat off. It's isolated from the network too on its own fiber connection all by itself. So yeah, you pretty much covered every thought I had.
Okay. I was even going to add, depending on what Rocco's job actually is and privilege level, you might not even be able to do much of anything. You might be locked out of almost everything. So you're like, oh, I'm going to try this and install it. And it's going to just say, nope, you don't have the privilege, and really limit what you can actually even do if you wanted to.
Something else that comes to mind, he talks about asking for permission versus asking for forgiveness. I would encourage you to go ask for permission. In fact, go to the guy with the biggest white beard and tell him, man, I think Unix and Linux is cool. Do you need a sidekick? And you might just find yourself the official assistant sysadmin to the old bearded guy, and that's a great place to be. I think there's nothing wrong with going about it that way. As far as tools to keep yourself out of trouble, I have made quite a bit of use of, well, first off, Shields Up from Gibson is actually really good for checking for open ports. And so making sure that you didn't forget and accidentally leave Telnet or what have you, SSH with a really weak username or password, just those kind of audits to make sure you don't have something dumb enabled, because usually when we get hit, it's because we did something dumb. At least that's the way it's been in my history of sysadminning. The two times I've had issues, both times it's It's because I opened a port temporarily, and we all know that the thing that lasts the longest in IT are the temporary solutions. So yeah,
is it still open?
No. On the first time, it was an SSH connection with like root/password. Like password was the password, but it was a segmented. It was a segmented demo network. And so I was able to just nuke the whole thing and start over. Like I could see the logs where somebody logged in it's funny. They were running commands checking like, what packages does this guy have installed? You know, can I grab something with curl and run my script? Can I pull binaries? Can I install binaries? And none of that worked because it was OpenWRT running on a little MIPS machine. And so there wasn't much of anything they could do. It was funny. And then the other time was I set up Windows Remote Desktop for somebody, and we put it on a non-standard port, and then we forgot about it. And somebody found that the port was open and what it was, and he did not have a very secure password.
I actually have a little story kind of related to this.
Yeah.
So when I first started work, you know, this is about 26 years ago, we had a certain type of machine, and whenever they had a certain kind of event, the leads, and we had people on shift, would say, hey, we want to know about this. Well, I went into the machine and just automatically had it page them whenever that event happened. Well, then the next shift, they didn't like that. They were getting way too many pages, and they didn't. So they called the IT person up to get it fixed. And they're like, well, did you do that? And I said, well, yeah, you asked for this, is what you wanted, right? And they're like, no, just let us know verbally. And the IT person, though, went, oh, you kind of know what you're doing. I'm going to take you under my wing and explain how all this works and what you can touch and what you shouldn't touch and why you shouldn't. And I got a whole bunch of training, and I became really close with kind of the IT group. And
nice.
It you know, I learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
But and they took the right, I think, approach and said, hey, instead of just say, don't touch anything, they went, let's take you under our wing and have you help things. And and I think part of it too is because then I could fix things that they didn't have to be bothered with when it's some of the easier stuff. But it worked out really good for me.
As a sort of full-time IT guy, I can tell you that the most amazing thing, there's a sweet spot of the amount of knowledge and skill and confidence that you want your customer to have, so that the dumb things they can fix themselves, and yet they realize when it's above their pay grade and they don't touch it. Like, there is a sweet spot there. I've worked with people that are completely computer illiterate, and those make you want to pull your hair out because you have to walk them through moving the mouse and clicking on something. And then you have the entire other side, and that's a problem because they'll call you one day and they're like, so I reformatted my computer and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, it goes bad that way too. So anyway, we are not here to talk about general sysadmin stuff. We're here to talk about general Linux stuff. And Rob has the first story about Broadcom.
Sysadmins.
I guess it is about sysadmins. This is actually, oh no. Did Broadcom realize that they own VMware?
Broadcom has decided they have enough money.
See, the joke with VMware is that it's great. Is it VMware? I think it's VMware. The historic joke has been it's great, but you hope that whoever owns it doesn't realize they own it. All right, take it, Rob.
All right. So after Broadcom's purchase of VMware last year, they proceeded in killing off of the free ESXi option, messing up reseller and OEM partnerships, ending the perpetual VMware vSphere license in favor of the subscription model, and increasing prices. About 30% is what we saw in our data center. So after all this revenue, all this new income they have, Broadcom has finally decided they have enough money now. So they're going to pass that savings on to you. Linux users and Windows users can now get VMware Workstation Pro for free. All you have to do is register and put your personal information in, and then it's all yours. Brilliant marketing. They ruin the VMware name and then think they can revive it by making one of their inferior products free. for personal use and non-commercial use only. But there's nothing checking to confirm how you're using it, but that's the purpose. For those out of the loop, VMware products it's software used to run virtual machines. VMware Workstation Pro is what is known as a Type 2 hypervisor, meaning it's more at the software layer, and it's further away from the bare metal, further away from the hardware and all that. Linux users have very little need for a Type 2 hypervisor because we have a Type 1 hypervisor built right into Linux. KVM with QEMU is a Type 1 hypervisor built right in the Linux kernel, meaning it's closer to bare metal. Being closer to bare metal means you will get far better performance. Even Windows has a Type 1 hypervisor built in called Hyper-V. And there's also free options such as VirtualBox as well. That's a Type 2, but there's lots of options in this field. So Broadcom made something free that nobody really needs. And, there's already a lot of great and a lot of better free alternatives already. So way to go. So all this said, there is maybe one or two or a few benefits or use cases for this. VMware Workstation, it was the first hypervisor, and it's been around and was king for a long time. I mean, now that the king's been dethroned for the Workstation Pro, at least, they're still doing good in the other areas, but it is still common to find virtual machines, virtual appliances already pre-built for VMware Workstation. And, maybe you want to try one of those pre-built systems. You want to sandbox something and be further away from, don't want to be hooked too deep in the system just for testing purposes or something. The free VMware Workstation Pro is there for you. And just throwing this in there, for those on Mac OS, VMware Fusion Pro is also free now also. So give them your information and have fun with it.
Fun. I'm kind of with you. I don't know why individuals would run VMware when there's such other good options. I guess maybe technically things are more supported that way. There's the guest editions, right?
Requires it?
Well, but this is the free version is not for work. If work requires it, then you're not supposed to use the free version.
You shouldn't be using the free version.
Shouldn't. Shall not.
So here's the deal. If your work requires you to do it, then your work needs to pay for it.
And they were paying through the nose.
Well, yeah, apparently.
Oh, yeah, when I was talking in the chat, I use VirtualBox for the, because sometimes when you're virtualizing, is it slow? Yeah, I don't care. Is it, I just click a button and it works. That's all I need for the very light usage I have. So, sometimes that's okay.
Makes sense.
If it's how you started and you got one small little purpose, like running your home accounting software, and you don't really tend to be a heavy user, just keep it. But if you really plan to really want some performance and you want to go all in on it and actually use it for a little more than just once a year to do your taxes, I'd really suggest a Type 1 hypervisor. I mean, if you're on Linux, KVM with Virt Manager or Boxy isn't really any harder. At least not much.
Like Jeff was saying, VirtualBox.
Yeah,
well, that's what Jeff.
That's
and me. For a while there, I was running Windows 7 on my Linux machine in a VirtualBox, and I just had it set up so it was a one-click access. And with two monitors, I had the Windows display on one monitor and the Linux display on the other monitor. And I just used my mouse to go from one to the other.
Yeah, I used to have fun virtualizing Windows when you could do the desktops on the cube in That was before Well, I was using KDE. Comp is Fusion. And I would, always set it up with Linux on 3 of the sides of the cube, and then Windows on the other side of the cube. That was fun because you could full screen Windows and it looked like a Windows machine, and then the matrix spun around you. It was great.
All right, I'm going to throw back then, way back. I'm talking almost 20 years ago. There's a great piece of software called Win4Lin, and it was somewhere in between Wine and a virtual machine. I don't even remember anymore, but basically I could run the full Windows desktop right on top of X. So I would have like an Alt F1 would be my Linux or Alt F2 or something would be my Linux desktop, and F3 would be my Windows desktop.
Nice. For one company I worked for,
I wish they'd never discontinued it.
They had me install this Linux distro on a USB stick. I boot up from it, and then they'd use Citrix to stream a VMware of Windows into it.
It's thin client, Linux thin client.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about the full fat version of Linux and the new stuff in the 6.9 kernel. I think Jeff has the scoop.
I do. So
scoop away, sir.
All right. As some of you may have heard this week, we have a new kernel. So this last Sunday, Linux kernel 6.9 was released, and there are some nice goodies in 6.9. What are they? I'm glad you asked, though I do want to call out something Linus said. A few regression fixes haven't made it to me yet. None of them look big or worrisome enough to delay the release for another week. We'll have to backport them when they get resolved and hit upstream. So this is my words now. You might want to wait, for the next release before you pick up 6.9 if you're all the worrisome type. And when I say the next release, not 6.10, I just mean 6.9.1. So it'll probably be out in a week, very, very shortly. But enough of that, and on to the goodies. 6.9 is going to have some performance gains for AMD CPUs. One of the benefits is the AMD P-State preferred core has made it into the kernel. So preferred cores are able to clock to a higher frequency than other cores, and Linux can now route high priority jobs to those cores and give a speed increase to your code. So that's kind of almost, you're kind of winning the silicon lottery inside your CPU for specific cores. There's also boosts in there for the AMD EPYC chips to get a speed increase over the 6.8 kernel. And while that's not huge, the benchmarking that Michael Arable did over at Phoronix showed about a 3% increase. And, every little increase we can get to the kernel helps. They start piling up after a while, 3% here and 2% there. Pretty soon, we're a lot faster. Now, Intel isn't left out as they're getting some love as well. For example, the Intel Xeon Max chip got some AI improvements. Intel Fast Boot support has been added to get your system up to speed faster by skipping some mode sets, which are not required during boot. This has been enabled previously for Skylake and above, but now older chipsets have it as well. I won't go into other Intel and AMD specific improvements, but just know there are a lot more lower level additions and tweaks which allow users to get the most out of their hardware. ARM64 got some love as well by getting Rust support for the AARCH64 or AARCH64 architecture. And speaking of Rust, the language has been updated to the 1.76.0 in the new kernel. Even those running IBM Power 11, or soon to be running them, I should say, receive support. So hardware love everywhere. Funny, we were talking about this. The Linux kernel virtualization model, the KVM, sees a clutch of assorted improvements, including performance gains and emulated event triggering and during forced immediate exit scenarios. So more tweaks there. LZ4 support has been added to the hibernation image creation and loading code. The exFAT file system got some improvements to the directory synchronization performance. Even EXT got an inode flag for atomic writes and online resize improvements, along with speed increases when dealing with case-insensitive file and folder handling. Now, remember, Linux is mostly case-sensitive, but for those times it's not, we have a speed increase. The Fuse pass-through mode which we've talked about in the past, made it into this kernel as well. So that speeds up your Fuse file system by allowing it not having to go through the CPU as much. It's more direct access to the Fuse file system. Mm-hmm. And I'll stop here, but take a look at all 3 articles in the show notes, as I've only touched on a few of the changes to the kernel, and there are way too many improvements to all go over in a simple podcast story.
Yeah, lots of fun stuff in there. I'm particularly looking forward to the Fuse improvements, because that's something that a lot of people end up using. You may not realize you use it, but a lot of times things are done using Fuse mounts. I think most of the NTFS, there's like if you mount an NTFS drive, there's a really good chance that it's done via Fuse. Almost everybody's using Fuse. You just don't know it because it's used in so many places. Yep.
And speaking of NTFS, something I didn't touch on, but they got rid of the old driver.
Okay.
The old NTFS is gone. Now we're totally on the new NTFS driver.
Yep.
The supported one.
The one that says somebody's still working on it.
Yes.
Makes sense.
And I use Fuse every time. I use secure shell file service.
SSHFS. Yep. Definitely a Fuse file system. All right.
Network share use Fuse.
Probably. There's a really good chance of it.
It's in lots of things. Ton of places.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to talk about KeyPass XC and what's new there?
I would love to. Spence Marius Nestor recently wrote about my favorite password manager getting a maintenance update to KeyPass XC 2.7.8. The new release improves the importing of Bitwarden passwords in the 1PUX format introduced in 2.7.7 and adds support for organization collections. Passkey support is also improved with support for NFC and USB transports, registering passkeys to existing entries, passing extension JSON data to the password browser, and displaying a warning about unencrypted data before exporting a passkey. KeyPass XE 2.7.8 also has some user interface enhancements, such as per database auto-save delay setting, a new setting to hide the menu bar, a keyboard shortcut for displaying the help of the search panel, new keyboard shortcuts for group switching, and the ability to configure the password strength check for the database password. KeyPass XC 2.7.8 changes the hotkey sequence used for the Clearfield autotype for Linux users. The SSH agent has also been improved to prevent it from using entries from the recycle bin. And KeyPass XC now shows the advanced settings checkbox only for settings that have them. Marius' article also includes a link to the release notes on the project GitHub page if you want more details on all the features and bug fixes in this release. Speaking of all the features, Bory Babasov reports on a debate sparked by a Debian developer's controversial decision to cut some of KeyPass XC's networking capabilities from the Debian testing distro. The functions cut are, believe it or not, browser integration, service secret integration, key sharing, this is sharing credentials with other users, and maintenance, this is used for managing your custom icons that you may set up. I always use the browser integration functions to autofill username and password into the correct site, so I don't have to worry about a phishing scheme catching me copying it into the wrong site. Bobby's article provides a link to the complete discussion of this particular case for those who want to follow it from the beginning. I'm going to start updating myself via Flatpak on all the systems to ensure I get all the features with any future updates.
So there is you've got the link here to it, and I don't think you talked about it, the fight between Debian and KeyPass XC. Or maybe you just briefly touched on it.
I just briefly touched on it. I figured we could discuss it if we wanted to.
Yeah, this is interesting. So the argument that the Debian guy is making is we never really intended to ship all these plugins by default, and so they're going and cutting them out.
They're not plugins.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're not necessarily plugins. It's not like people can go and re-add this the way you can with a plugin. Like if they were plugins, this would make sense. What the Debian maintainer is talking about would make a lot of sense, but that's not the case.
There's compile keys or commands that you can use to disable these functions if you don't want them in your compiled version. But that's more for people who want to take and try it on their own, because it can potentially mess up something else in the application.
Yeah. It's also very interesting that users have pointed out that, hey, Mr. Debian maintainer, intentionally breaking functionality is a violation of Debian policy. It's going to be very fascinating to see what happens with this, whether somebody higher up in Debian brings the hammer down and fixes things, or if the Debian maintainer is going to be kind of a god unto himself. And I don't mean that in necessarily a derogatory way even. So like the way certain organizations are put together, the individual key members in certain places have a lot of autonomy, and it's built that way on purpose. And I think Debian is one of those. So I don't know what the right answer here is, like in a broader sense. It does seem like it's kind of terrible for users to turn off some key functionality.
User hostile.
Yeah, it seems a little user hostile.
Well, in the link, the quote seems pretty hostile. For the person that said, no, we're not going to ship this, it was kind of like, okay.
I can understand. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was going to say, so you kind of answered the question for me. So to use the KeyPass XC, you have to have it compiled into your browser. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, there's an extension that's available for both Firefox and Chrome that you can add into your browser, that extension.
And the extension talks to the KeyPass XC install, but there are compilation switches in the KeyPass XC build itself where you can disable that function. And apparently Debian is now disabling that function. With the
even if you have the extension installed, you have to explicitly go into KeyPass XC, the application, into the browser integration and enable it there.
Oh, okay. Because I was a little confused about this at first, because I thought maybe it was like, well, why can't people just, it's not coming loaded by default. Okay. So we just say, I want to use KeyPass XC, install the extension, and then it works.
You have to recompile. You have to recompile to re-enable it.
No, you don't have to recompile. By default, it's in there. It's just a checkbox in your settings. So you've got all the features that I was talking about. What the Debian tester did, and if you look into Bobby Borisov's article, he's got screenshots of what it looks like with the full application suite enabled compared to what the Debian installer did.
So are you saying that it's still in there, it's just disabled by default in the settings?
It's still in the application. The browser integration is a check under settings. You can go into, you can say enable it, and then you go into the extension and you click to activate it, and it looks to see if you've got the database. Then it sits up so that the database has a public and private key type thing for communicating with the extension.
Well, that doesn't sound as bad then.
So I don't think that's correct. He's got two screenshots here, and he says the users of the stable version of Ubuntu and Debian still have access to the full-featured version. Those betting on Debian testing will encounter the following. And so you've got Yeah, so encounter the following in the top screenshot instead of, and then the second screenshot. So your second screenshot is what you currently have with Debian stable. And so under application settings, you've got general security, browser integration, SS agent, key share. If you're running the testing version, which has the new changes under application settings, you only have general and security. So they have just not compiled in browser integration, SS agent, key share, secret service. It looks to me like these are just turned off at compile time. And so to get them back, you would have to recompile KeePassXC altogether.
Or load the Flatpak
or load the Flatpak.
Uninstall the Debian.
I mean, the worst thing about this, I think, is that a password manager, the most common use that I think most people use a password manager is with browser integration.
Yeah, that's where it's most useful in today's age. Okay, so before we throw too much shade on Debian, they do actually have a solution here, and this is the proper solution. They now have two KeePassXC packages. They have KeePassXC and they have KeePassXC Full, and the full version has all of that stuff compiled into it. That is a good solution. I approve of this.
Oh, they've got.
I don't know.
They put up an update saying that they're actually going to do that now.
It says it is there. It's available in Debian's testing and unstable repositories.
Okay, because when I'd looked, they hadn't even done that, and they'd closed it saying anybody contacting KeePassXC about a bug is going to be referred to Debian testing.
I mean, that's an okay solution, but I still don't see the point of taking out the key feature. But Jeff?
Yeah, I guess I see where the maintainer's saying, well, it's a bigger attack surface, except that's the feature that like 99% of the people are going to want, if not even higher than that.
Yeah, let's disable web browsers in Debian because that's a big attack target.
Yeah.
No, let's go even further. Let's disable networking.
Yeah. So the solution that they came to in the thread was that they are moving to KeePassXC minimal and KeePassXC full. So you once again can get to everything that you want in KeePassXC, or if you're just using it for an offline, not in the browser password manager, you can do the minimal install.
That's all right then.
Bravo to cooler heads for finally prevailing and doing something reasonable here.
Yep.
And it would be interesting to see in a year the downloads between the two.
Yeah. Ken?
I was going to say, and for those who do want the full without having to go through the Deb package manager, they release it automatically and maintain both an app image and Flatpak.
Mm-hmm.
KeePassXC team does.
Yeah, so it's official. I feel, particularly something like a password manager, feel much better about official images rather than, who knows who built it and uploaded it to the App Store. Those are a little sketchy always.
And I agree with, I think it was Ken, that I like password managers in the browser so that if it says, you're not putting your password where you think you are, it kind of just another buddy check on those web addresses that
indeed.
So it's
all right.
Fun to keep up to date on the web address that's supposed to be going to when they change them.
It's now x.com. Rob, do we need to get you some theme music for your Distro Hoppers Corner?
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's the theme music I had in mind.
It's appropriate. It's
everybody
perfect
loves
for
a
this.
Calliope.
All right. And now it's time for another Distro Hoppers Corner. Rescue Zilla 2.5 is out this week with some nice new updates and features. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about Rescue Zilla before. It is now based on the latest Ubuntu 24.04. Parclone is updated to version 0.3.27, which should improve some issues with Btrfs or BTRFS, supporting Btrfs version 6.3.3 now. A new experimental command line interface has been added with caveats. One being it should be considered experimental and unstable. 2, it only supports images created by Clonezilla and RescueZilla. And 3, CLI only supports backup with verify, restore, and clone features coming soon. Other features is a continued image scan after error and some bug fixes. So like I said, I'm not sure if we've ever talked about RescueZilla or looked at it before. So for those watching the video, let's take a quick look at what we have here. So RescueZilla here, you have a backup, which will back up a full image of whatever disk partition you want. You can click into it and it's going to find what you have there and you can step through super easy. Restore, same thing, but in reverse. You click restore, find your image you want to restore. You got clone, which is going to clone the full drive, basically Clonezilla style. You can verify an image. You got this image explorer beta. And then there's some other tools. This isn't the whole thing, but when you boot it up, this is a screen that comes in. You close that if you want, and you got an XFC desktop. And on in here also, there's your RescueZilla. You can start the backup if you close that. But you have things like you can create a bootable USB right from here if you want to make more of these. You can manage your disks, file recovery. So this is the test disk tool, which I don't know if we've ever talked about that either, but it is a slogging long file recovery program that, if you've lost your partitions and everything, it may take days to scan through and you're not going to have file names and all kinds of things, but it can recover anything that's on there still pretty much.
It's file carving.
Yeah,
we don't talk about that sometime. File carving is fun.
And then you got a web browser, gparted, hardware lister, and then another useful tool on here is they call it photograph deep scan, which the tool they're using is photo rec. Brings up the terminal, and that's another similar tool where you can scan for images on your drive that have been lost, deleted. And in a nutshell, that's about all it is. I say a distro hopper's corner. Obviously, I'm not gonna run this as my main daily driver. Maybe it'd be a fun challenge, but not this week.
I mean, at that point, you're just running Ubuntu, right?
Stripped down version of Ubuntu.
But I mean, you can get all the packages. How long would it take you to go, oh wait, I need this package. Oh hey, look, it's unapped. I can just install it. You'd be running it just about vanilla Ubuntu pretty quick, I think.
Yeah. So this is definitely something I'm going to put into my my tool case, as it's a super simple. I mean, Clonezilla I've been using for years, but you really got it all in a nice, simple, easy package here. Yeah.
Throw it on your Ventoy key. Make use of it there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit next week.
Fun.
But recovering that partition on that 25 terabyte spinning platter drive, you're going to be there a while.
Yeah. Maybe don't boot that on your main computer. Put that on a laptop or something and just sit it over in the corner for a while.
Last time I ran test disk on something, it was it's probably almost close to a decade ago. I don't know, maybe 6-8 years ago.
Is it still running?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'm going to say the drive size, I mean, they were slower then too. I'm sure it was spinning, and I'm sure, I don't know what the drive size was, but I bet it was maybe 500 gig, give or take. And I remember it took like 3 days. And then it was a mess to dig through and get what I could out of it.
Yeah, it's such a pain to dig through, because what it's doing is it's just going sector by sector through the hard drive and looking for file headers. It's essentially running the equivalent of the Linux file command, looking for magic numbers on each sector, and then it tries to figure out, what are the other sectors that go with this file, and then it saves that to disk. with random numbers as the name. And so you'll have like 10,000 JPEGs or PNGs, and you just have to click through them one at a time. Like, that's an icon, that's an icon, that's an icon, that's an icon, that's cache from the internet, that's an icon, that's cache from the internet. Oh, hey, look, there's one of my family pictures that I was looking for. Now I only have 9,987 more to go through. Yeah.
But depending on how much you use the drive, oh, that's a family picture, but I've only got 2/3 of it. And the bottom is random noise or garbage.
Also can be a thing. Yes.
Be so much easier to recover from that backup.
It would be. There's a reason. There's a reason we suggest backups.
You should mention that sometime, Ken.
Yeah, Ken, you're really falling down on your job, not telling people to back up all the time.
Yeah.
Jeff, you want to talk about the next version of Ubuntu and what new fun things are coming there?
Oh, of course. Because 2404, that's the old stuff. We got to start looking at 2410. I mean, we can't just stagnate. Well, we have been talking about Ubuntu 24.04. The developer team is already working on 2410, though. Oliver Smith, who's the interim engineering director at Canonical for the Ubuntu development team, has released some roadmap plans for 2410. Because 24.04 is a long-term release, they tend not to be as cutting edge on the code, and package-wise, they're going to be supporting it for many years to come. So the more stable the base, the less work they have to do with backporting fixes and needed changes. That means that 2410, they can put the pedal to the metal and really push some boundaries, because 2410 will have a short life. It's only going to last, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's like 6 months or 9 months, and then it's deprecated.
Yep.
Though, as much as they push, Oliver said one of the main goals is to polish what they've done in 24.04. I think for one of the biggest changes, though, is going to be the plan to have Wayland be the default for NVIDIA graphics on GNOME 47. Mm-hmm. And I'm betting Kubuntu will have KDE 6.1 or possibly later, depending on how the development goes and release schedules of KDE. We talked about Google and Flutter last week, but Canonical is still leaning into it and the transition of Flutter from GTK3 to GTK4. So we're gonna have an updated Flutter. TPM based full disk encryption was planned to be in 24.04, but didn't make it in. So they're going to get it rolled into 2410, and this will be for those who want it, and it's not a mandatory requirement. So I just want to put that out there, so in case anybody was panicking or worried. Other things that didn't quite make it into 24.04 were things like improvements to the App Center, support for third-party Debian package installs from the GUI, which should be in 2410. They're looking at improving messaging around snaps, both inside and outside of the App Center, and giving more detailed information about snap publishers. And with the release of Ubuntu Core 24, they will be rebasing all the snaps maintained in the desktop team to the latest release. On the lighter side, they're acknowledging that this is going to be the 20th birthday of Ubuntu on 24.10. So they're planning on putting in some Easter eggs for people to find, though they did preface that with maybe. So I think it's, will they be able to squeeze something in, or are they going to be so busy on everything else? While there's a lot they want to do, they are planning on growing the desktop team by 50% over the next year. They plan on opening a range of positions across all levels of seniority in the coming weeks. So if you want to work on Ubuntu, possible job opportunity coming.
Oh, interesting.
Oliver Finish. What'd you say?
Just interesting. I have a buddy that's a Linux buddy that's looking for a job. So I will have to go put a bug in his ear. I don't know that he wants to work for Ubuntu, though.
Well, and I mean, grow the team by 50% in the next year. I mean, they're kind of really leaning into the desktop, really trying to make things better. So, hey, bravo. And any improvement, I'm all for.
They got picked up with slack from Flutter, from Google's Flutter.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're picking up some. Oliver Finish is asking for ideas that people are passionate about, a better gaming experience, better interoperability with Windows. Maybe you're interested more in immutable OSs. He says he's all ears and wants to hear from the community and make Ubuntu grow and make things better for the users. So take a look at the show notes, and while it goes over a lot of what I've covered. There's also a link to the Ubuntu discourse where you can get Oliver's exact text. And I've only covered a part of what was said. So if you want more details, the information's there. But when I can, I will run an early version of 2410 and report back on my findings so we can kind of keep everybody up to date on how the progress is going.
I am humored. We talk about making it better. And of course, our chat room says, bring back FLAC packs then. Get rid of snaps.
Yep.
People know what they want.
Where do you put suggestions in at?
Yeah, there's a place I think. I'm sure they already sift through it for the trolls and get rid of those before anybody important actually sees them. So anybody asking for snaps to go away and flatpaks to come out, I'm sure those get just shuffled to the side. Those are just troll messages.
Then you just got to go right to social media. I guess it's already that there though.
Well, and earlier this year, they hired the person that's supposed to help get snaps in other distributions and make it more of a universal tool and less based on canonical.
Yep. Need to get the patch upstream in the Linux kernel first.
That way it'll be completely transparent whether it's a snap or a flat pack.
Well, without the upstream kernel patch, you don't get all of the sandboxing. So it's not as useful of a tool to run snaps if you don't have the patch upstream.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
Mm-hmm. And there are some low-level things that snaps can do that flat packs can't. So they're not 100% interchangeable.
It's true.
Close enough, though.
I could see
patches to the kernel.
No, but other interesting things. I could see. I don't know. I think there's some potential for snaps to have a life and actually be successful and do useful things. We'll see. We'll see if it actually comes to pass. Jason asks what Flutter is. So Flutter is Google's framework for writing code once in Dart, and it'll run on Android and iOS and the desktop and on the browser. It's pretty cool. I've done a tiny bit with it.
Check out last week's show.
We talked about it quite a bit last week.
Was it last week? Yeah,
last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah,
because
somebody. One of the distros is starting to develop their new installer in Dart/Flutter, and then Google comes out and announces, "Oh, by the way, we're cutting 50% of our Flutter team." Oh,
distro that starts with, is it a K?
I don't remember which one it was, honestly.
Kubuntu, Ubuntu,
probably. Yeah.
Well, and last week's show, David does a lot of web stuff, and he was filling in, and he had some comments and insights on that as well, because it's kind of in his wheelhouse.
And it could be a new Chrome OS operating system as well.
No, that's what Fuchsia is what they call that.
Yeah.
No, Flutter.
They both
Flutter
start with
framework. It both starts with an F. It's kind of the same thing.
Flutter is used on Fuchsia, but
probably yes. So one of the other interesting things, getting back to Ubuntu 24.10, because that's what we're supposed to be talking about. It's going Wayland, and there is very quickly coming a day when there isn't anybody working on even security updates for X. And I'm not sure that everybody realizes that, but there's just a few companies out there that are actually doing the work, and most of them rhyme with Red Hat, and they are about to stop supporting their last X11 only OS. So
yeah, I know a lot of people don't realize that. I talk to them all the time in various areas.
In fact, Keith S512, I don't care, X just works.
Until it doesn't.
I understand, but one of these days there's going to be a really nasty security vulnerability found in it, and there's not going to be anybody to fix it. And then we're going to tell you we told you so.
I'm just thinking
for me, Wayland just
Jonathan about rhymes.
Yeah.
Maybe like if you would have said bread cat, We'll go over it after the show. It's okay, Jonathan.
Give Jeff a lesson on what sarcasm means. All right, Ken. Raspberry Pi did something cool.
Yes, in fact, Marius Nestor wrote about the Raspberry Pi Foundation announcing the availability of the official Raspberry Pi M.2 hat for the latest Raspberry Pi 5 single-board computer. We've reported about several third-party hardware manufacturers' M2.hat adapter boards for the Raspberry Pi 5. Marius preferred to wait for the official Raspberry Pi M.2 hat. The adapter board, called, believe it or not, Raspberry Pi M.2 hat Plus, promises up to 500 megabytes per second data transfer to and from these peripherals. To support fast peripherals, the Raspberry Pi M2 hat Plus attaches to Raspberry Pi 5's single-lane PCI Express 2.0 interface exposed on a 16-pin, 0.5 millimeter pitch flexible printed cable connector on the left-hand side of the board. It supports devices with the M.2 M-Key edge connector in the 2230 and 2242 form factors, supplying them with up to 3 amps. The board features a 16 millimeter stacking header and threaded spacers to be fitted on a Raspberry Pi 5 board that uses the official Raspberry Pi active cooler. The official Raspberry Pi M.2 hat Plus costs only $12 and can be purchased right now from Raspberry Pi Foundation's network of approved resellers worldwide. The Raspberry Pi Foundation wants to make it easier to build high-quality PCIe accessories for Raspberry Pi 5, and so they have published their schematics as a reference design. Jonathan, you may think you'll borrow that reference design?
Probably not. I was going to say I've got the Pineberry card here to do a NVMe, and it works great. The Raspberry Pi 5 running on an NVMe is a great experience.
And there's one of those third-party adapters that sells the hat with the NVMe as well.
I'm not surprised. It's interesting, when Raspberry Pi made their announcement, they actually called out the Pineberry guys for doing a really good job and beating them to it. It was kind of funny. I also saw on X, aka Twitter, the internet service formerly known as Twitter, that there is a fellow working on an NVMe drive that is also a PoE Plus hat, and that looks pretty interesting. Valier, at Valier Deng. I retweeted it. You can go check my Twitter at JP_Bennett.
Is that to power the Raspberry Pi with?
Yeah, so it's PoE, so it'll power the Pi as well as connects into the PCI Express slot and gives you NVMe. So it's kind of
sure it wasn't a PoE Plus out port to power some other device. Yeah,
I don't see that being very useful. Although I tell you something I would love to see, and this is a real niche, but I would love to see USB-C PD out for the Pi. That would be cool. But that's real niche. Not everybody needs that. Hardly anybody needs that. But I could use that for a couple of things. Anyway, so there are Pi 5 hats coming. They're being worked on. But I'm down for it. I love it. I like the more power that the Pi 5 gives you. I would tell you the things that I'm really looking forward to from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Of course, the Pi 5 PoE hat. That's going to be cool when that comes out. But the CM5 and the Pi 500, those are both going to be, they're going to be pretty slick.
Which will you get first?
Whichever one comes out first. Those come out, it's pretty much going to be an instant buy. And, unless I've got somebody else that I'm, like with the Pineberry Pi, I'm already thrilled with this one. It works just great, so I don't need to run out and buy another one. But like the PoE hat, or particularly the Pi 500, the CM5, when that comes out, I'm probably going to order at least 2 of them right away. Because I've got places to put them already. Just ready, just waiting for them. All right, let's. Yes, Ken.
With PoE going into the Raspberry Pi 5, how would you set it up for uninterruptible power?
I had this question just the other day, and they sell things on Amazon that are PoE UPSs. It's a little network board that supplies PoE Plus, and has batteries built into it.
I have one actually.
Does it actually work? Is it as slick as it sounds?
Yeah, it actually is, and reasonably priced. I bought them a few years ago to just hook up an access point to it, so you could actually do some live tests to see what the reach is for placing access points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it works better than I expected, and the thing is small.
Yeah, sounds like what I was looking at.
That said, Ken, I mean, if you're powering your switch or your Raspberry Pi off a PoE, and you're also providing network through it, that's probably coming from a PoE powered switch, and you just got to put the PoE switch on a UPS.
Yes, that is the right way to do that. Okay, let's see. We've got Rob. What is the llama, and why does it need freed?
So it's funny how just
it's hilarious.
Just last week, maybe it was the week before, but I think it was last week, we brought up the music player from the 90s that I had the quote wrong, but it really whipped the llama's back end. And now this week, Winamp, that's what we're talking about, Winamp, is in the news. It's almost like they listen to our show or something, because this week, the Winamp CEO announced that on September 24th, 2024, they will be open sourcing Winamp. The new open source project will be released under the new name of FreeLlama. At this time, Winamp or FreeLlama will still be Windows only, but with all popular open source projects, if it isn't too complicated, at least hopefully someone will bring it to Linux. And, you know, this essentially is a story floating around all over the place on the internet, but there's still a lot left unknown, a lot of unknowns. And there's some concern that this maybe it won't be as great as it initially sounds, because, you know, we don't know what license this will be under, but what we do know is in the announcement, the CEO noted that, quote, Winamp will continue to be the owner of the software and will have the final say on all or on any innovations made in the official version, unquote. And then they also said the Android and iOS versions of Winamp will still remain closed source. Stephen Von Nichols from ZDNet believes this is just an attempt to get more developers working on the software, adding that it's hard to maintain corporate control over an open source project, kind of implying that it's not really going to be open source. Actually, he didn't implied. I think he actually said it in the article. But until we know what the license is, I still think there's a lot of hope. Many open source projects maintain control of their project and the official release. And the Linux kernel itself is a fine example of that. Not just anybody can throw it in there. You know, they approve it first. You know, their blog post states they're maintaining control over the official version. So with proper open source license, there's nothing stopping anyone from forking it. It just might not make it into the official version that Winamp is releasing.
So that's how every project works.
Exactly.
Okay. It may be that they mean that the people behind Winamp mean something else when they say this, but I will tell you what it sounds like to me. This is how every project works. Yes, you can write source code and make a pull request. We retain the right to not pull your pull request because they are the owner of the Winamp trademark. And so Winamp, the company, is going to be the one that decides what goes into the official Winamp release, even after it's open sourced. But if you want to fork it and create InWamp or, you know, MinAmp or whatever you want to call it. LinWamp. There you go. Ooh, I like that. LinWamp. Yeah, if it's as long as it's an actual open source, like OSI approved license, then you could do that. And yeah, makes sense. I think it's great. There are interesting things about this though.
Yeah, Stephen Von Nickel's article really poo-pooed it, I guess, saying that basically it's not really open source. But that wasn't the only. We
don't know that yet. We don't know that.
It wasn't the only flaw. He also mentioned the Mac OS version, which I looked, and there's no Mac OS version. So,
I mean, if it goes open source, you can bet that somebody will make it build on Mac OS.
There will be.
Yeah. If you go to the actual winamp.com page and you look at it, there are a couple of things that are odd. Let's see. We're in May. I think we're in May, right? Yes, midway through May. I'm pretty sure. They've announced that they will open source it in September of this year, which is like 4 months away.
Yeah, clean up the code and get all the bad comments out of there.
I guess that's what they're doing. So that's one thing that's interesting. Setting a date.
Special date. Maybe it's a special date too. Maybe there's some significance to that.
I mean, that could be. Speaking of special dates, the date on the press release is December 16. Did you notice that?
I did not.
If you look at the press release, Winamp, December 16, 1 press release. So like, it was almost on Jesus's first birthday, maybe? I don't know. It's a long time ago.
Sounds like somebody may have used a template and forgot to update a few things.
That could be. It's special.
But the article talks about, it sounds like it's not so much open source as they're opening their source. Like they're letting people see it, but not actually, you're not supposed to use it in anything else. Like they're not putting it under like a distributable license. Am I reading that wrong? Or is
that is what people are speculating. And that is probably based on the fact that in the press release, they always use the term opening the source code, opening up its code, and they never use the term open source. So I think what has happened is people are reading the press release and they're going, oh, they are signaling that this is going to be a source available license, not a true open source license. Hopefully that is an incorrect assumption.
Yeah. I mean, and I used to use it all the time back in the day, and I loved it because I'm a simple person. I love
a simple man.
Just have you just put your list of music in, and you just had, hit your play and all that. I always had the minimal interface. I don't need album art. I don't need lyrics. I don't need all the history of it. Here's the song. It's playing. My basic controls. I'm done. In a way, it's like, I wonder too, though, like at this point in time, there's so many music players out there. Is it going to really have much of an impact other than maybe people load it up and go, oh, I remember this way back in the day, and they play with it a bit, and then they go back to the regular music player?
Oh, I would get it for nostalgia. I would use it.
Now, Jeff, my question is, how will it compare to Plex Amp?
I don't know. But I use my music player is Dead Beef. That is my main music player because it gives me, I think I've talked about this before, bit perfect audio, but also it's pretty simple interface. You can customize it, but I have it just the music, simple controls. I don't have any, there's no EQs, there's no album art and other stuff. It just, and the other thing though, I wanted to say about this, I'm curious how the source code looks, because if we go back when Netscape opened their source code and said, okay, here are the browsers for free. That's where Firefox came from, because the source code was such a mess, that it basically said, okay, we just got to start over because it's such spaghetti code. I'm curious if this has been in development for decades, how does that source code look? Is it even going to be like very, very structured, or is it going to be like, oh my gosh, we've had so many different developers with their fingers in it?
That's why it's taken so long to clean up.
I basically just operate under the assumption that any closed source code is garbage. Any and all of it. Yeah. And I covered the security beat, so I kind of know that by experience that, yes, it is actually garbage.
Now, this is the original source code from when it was running on Windows. Did it go back as far as 3.1?
I don't think so.
I don't
Windows
remember.
95 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to see a lot of references to Windows libraries.
Version 1 of WinAmp was released in 97. So was always like a Windows 95, 97 thing.
I tell you what, though, I get it just to get that sound file or whenever you fire it up, you know, saying that catchphrase that Rob said at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, and really, maybe I shouldn't even worry about it since we have, I think, what, XMMP or QMMP, which look just like WinAmp anyway. And I don't know, I'm getting nostalgic over nothing here.
And most of the time I go for PlexAmp for playing my music. Occasionally I'll use FF Play if I'm having problems with a particular file.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Do we want to talk about one of my least favorite things?
Ubuntu?
Well, vendor kernels. Now, when I say vendor kernels, I'm thinking of maybe something slightly different than what this is talking about, although it still applies. So when I'm talking about a vendor kernel, I'm thinking about, you've got your obscure little single board computer, and the only thing that'll run on it is a rock kernel from 5 years ago where they have all of their patches. That's what I think of when I think of vendor kernels. And I despise those because they're so ancient and it means that you can only run supported OSs on it. And this is about something a little different though, isn't it, Jeff?
It is, but it kind of applies in the same kind of way. I think it applies. Yes. So the company CIQ, which is the parent company of Rocky Linux, wrote a white paper named Vendor Kernels, Bugs, and Stability. The basis for this is they postulate that Linux kernel vendors are plagued with security vulnerabilities due to the flawed engineering process that backport fixes have. So Greg Crow-Hartman, who is a Linux stable kernel maintainer, said that if you want to be secure, you should always use the latest long-term stable kernel. The article calls out the key word here is latest. Using any LTS kernel isn't enough. Vendors don't do that, though. When you have a long-term Linux distribution, they keep the same kernel and backport fixes. Well, mostly. There are some fixes that don't get backported because the more they backport, the more they're messing with the code and the more they might be introducing something that could cause an incompatibility. So when looking specifically at Red Hat 8.8 kernels, so the distribution, Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 8.8, the kernel inside there revealed 111,750 individual commits to the changelog. When looking at the pace of the backports, it was pretty steady, but around November of 2021, the activity decreased, and again in November 2022. The paper figures as the kernel is aging, the backporting is getting more conservative to keep the kernel as stable as possible. They found, for example, 4,594 bugs which were not fixed in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.8. While a person might think, well, okay, because of the age of the kernel, the serious bugs must have been fixed and the ones left are probably just minor annoyances or they don't affect many people. That would be a wrong thought. As Greg Crow-Hartman says, any bug has the potential of being a security issue at the kernel level. Jonathan Colbert, who is a Linux kernel developer and Linux Weekly news editor in chief, agreed, excuse me, and has said, in the kernel, just about any bug, if you're clever enough, can be exploitable to compromise the system. The kernel is in a unique spot in the system. It turns a lot of ordinary bugs into vulnerabilities. So looking back at the Red Hat 8.8, there are almost 4,600 holes in the kernel where an attacker might be able to get in. The last major set of bug fixes were in May of 2023. So we're about a year ago since they last patched the kernel in that release. Since then, like I said, the backporting of the bug fixes has stopped. So, I want to make people aware. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux is called out and used as an example, but this applies to any LTS distribution which keeps a kernel for a long period of time. So they give very specific numbers for even different versions of Red Hat, but like I said, this applies to any long-term release, whether it's SUSE, Ubuntu, whoever. The paper did have 4 critical conclusions. 1, the vendor kernel model is broken and beyond repair. 2, vendor kernels are inherently insecure, with late cycle stabilized vendor kernels being particularly vulnerable. 3, the sheer number of known open bugs makes analyzing or classifying them all impractical. And 4, upstream stable kernels offer significantly better protection against security vulnerabilities and bugs in the kernel code. Now, I know people like to have the most stable system they can, but I do want to bring up that even Linus Torvalds still eats his own dog food, which is a saying where a person, group, or company uses their own product. So when Linus is doing his development work for the kernel, he's using the latest stable kernel to do his work on his system. So he's always on the latest kernel. Part of the eating your own dog food is to find any issues yourself before your customers do. And because, if you're using it, you'll have better insight on how to improve it. But this is a balancing act, because even small updates might cause something to break. So, we're balancing security with stability. The article in the show notes is much longer and way more detail. So you can look at the issue and, like I said, it's tons more statistics for the Red Hat Enterprise releases. And right now it looks like CIQ and thus Rocky Linux is coming down on the side of security. So they might update their kernel more often, even on the older releases. So let me know what you think.
So actually, Rocky and CIQ made an announcement right at a month ago that they are going to start offering mainline kernel releases as one of the things that you can do inside Rocky. And so this, it tickles me. And I went looking for this because I knew either Alma or Rocky had done it, and I wasn't sure which it was. Well, it's Rocky. It's CIQ. CIQ being the company behind Rocky Linux. Yeah, so they a month ago they said CIQ building the next generation of software infrastructure for enterprise today launched fully supported upstream stable kernels for Rocky Linux via the CIQ Enterprise Linux platform, and then apparently they're also making it available in the community builds as well. So you don't actually have to pay for a Rocky Linux. It appears they're going to make that available to everybody, which is very good. So there's a little bit of how shall I put it? It's sort of inside baseball. Like there's some. It's not surprising that when CIQ took a look at this, they came to the conclusion that, oh yeah, using the default Red Hat kernel is terrible, and you should use a distro. You should use an enterprise distro that offers mainline upstream builds. That would be the secure thing to do. Like, it's a little self-serving, but at the same time, I think it's probably true. Just something to keep in mind.
Well, especially those distributions where they say, okay, we're going to support this for 7 years.
Mm-hmm. 10 years. 12 years.
Or 12 years. Yeah. Looks like those backports are just stopping. And I imagine as the kernel keeps marching along, hey, we found this bug. It's probably getting harder to backport, possibly, just because
definitely.
The code has changed,
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Well, and it becomes harder to even determine the old version of the kernel that we're supporting. Does it have this same bug? Like there comes a point where the code has changed so much, it probably is not there, but it's very difficult to determine whether you have that bug or a similar bug.
And it takes somebody to go back and do a bunch of experimentation to figure it out. And they've got 20 other things they're supposed to be doing as well.
Yep. one of the interesting things is that goes along with this is the Linux kernel does LTS releases of the kernel. And the sad thing is hardly anybody uses them. And so it wasn't that long ago, it was a few months ago, that the Kernel Foundation came out and said, so we're going to stop doing this long-term support. Like we're not going to maintain LTS kernels as long as we were, and we're only going to maintain like 2 of them at a time instead of the 7 or 8 that we were maintaining. And the reason being, nobody was using them. And so it's unfortunate. Maybe we'll get to the point eventually to where people use them more often. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know, because I know the LTS comes out. It's the last stable kernel of the year, calendar year. And a lot of times these other distributions have a kernel that doesn't align with that. So that's where they say, well, you know, the Red Hats, the Canonicals, everybody is like, we're going to maintain our own.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate it doesn't line up.
Seems like a lot of extra work too on them, on their part, that isn't necessary. They could like put that development work into other parts of their distro.
Yes, but at the same time, from their point of view, like doing that development work to give people a slightly more modern LTS kernel, like that's the value add. That is why you might want to go with Red Hat, because you might have a few versions newer of a kernel than you would be if you went with the last one from last year.
I thought Red Hat was always quite a bit behind. versus the actual LTS kernel, not necessarily. Versus everybody.
I mean, they
DOS and Stream, and then they go through Fedora, and then finally it's a Red Hat.
Yeah, well, so they pick a Fedora release and they churn on that for a while and make sure it's real solid, and then that becomes Red Hat. But Fedora is so bleeding edge, by the time it becomes Red Hat, it's still not terribly old. Anyway, so Keith points out, yeah, there is 6x long-term kernels. There are, but if you go to the kernel.org page /category/release.html and you look at the long-term, it's interesting. A lot of them EOL in December of 2026. Like 4 of them are going to end of life at the same time, and that's because, and I can find the announcement if you want it. It's because they came out and said people are not using the long-term kernels, so at this point in the future, we're just not going to maintain as many of them. We're not going to maintain them for as long.
They're maintaining the promises they already had in place, but they're not making new promises.
Yep.
So I wish other companies would learn to do that. Not naming any names there.
Rhymes with the bread cat again.
Rhymes with bread cat. I think we just found the show name. All right. Let's talk about GNOME. Ken, why are we talking about GNOME? Nobody here uses GNOME, do we?
Actually, Bobby Borisov opened my eyes to a reference OS used primarily by developers to test and develop the GNOME desktop environment in real time. It's called, believe it or not, GNOME OS. According to Bobby, a key component of GNOME OS's infrastructure is its use of OS Tree, a tool that deploys and manages a read-only root file system. It allows for quick delete updates and callbacks. This ensures that even in its experimental phase, GNOME OS remains a robust environment for testing the latest innovations without risking system stability. GNOME OS is introducing systemd-sys update to enhance security by providing a trust chain that extends from the bootloader upward, accessible both online and offline, while bringing the benefits of an image-based design to GNOME OS, including immutability, automatic updates, adaptability, factory resets, and uniformity. GNOME OS actually started a gradual migration last October by releasing images incorporating systemd-sys update running alongside the traditional OS tree-based ones. According to Bobby, this dual approach allows for a thorough testing of the new system before it becomes the default update mechanism. Bobby gives more information in his article about the development process and a link to the GNOME OS official announcement if anyone is really interested.
Yeah, it's fascinating the groups that are embracing the atomic Linux idea. That's what OS Tree is. It's immutable Linux, the immutable desktop. It does kind of make sense for this, where you're going to be testing and potentially breaking things. So it's cool.
Break it, roll back. Break it, roll back.
Exactly. This is kind of like the equivalent to KDE Neon, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Yep.
I don't think anybody here's tried KDE Neon, have they, Jeff?
We have. I have, at least. It was broken because it used a way too old version of Ubuntu. I was kind of annoyed that they stuck with Ubuntu LTS, because so many things about KDE 6 were not working under that.
Which is why you said that Fedora is a premier way to do KDE 6 back in the day.
I think it probably still is, considering that Ubuntu 24.
I think Jeff's muted.
Yeah, Jeff keeps trying to talk and we don't hear him. Yeah.
Whoops.
Hey, yeah, there he is.
I've used Neon, several versions of it, and I would agree with Jonathan's statement that even though the idea is they want a LTS for a very stable OS, and then they can run cutting edge KDE software, because they were behind on the desktop and so much relied on, for KDE 6 needed the newer like kernels and software. Yes, I would agree. If you want to try KDE 6, Fedora was a much better experience than Neon. Neon, I never did get fully working.
But have you tried OpenSUSE?
I have in the past, not for KDE 6.
Tumbleweed.
I haven't Tumbleweed. I haven't tried KDE 6 on it yet, or maybe I did. I don't know.
Yeah, I bet it works. I bet it's a pretty decent experience. I still stick with my statement though. Go with Fedora 40. It's really quite nice there.
Yeah, and
How long
if you're a
before you'll be
Kubuntu
saying,
user,
go ahead,
I'd
Jeff.
say if you're a Kubuntu user, it's very similar. You're going to be right at home.
Yeah, Ken.
I was going to ask, how long before you start changing that to Fedora 41?
So when it's funny when Fedora 40 branched. So what they do each time, a couple of months before release. So Fedora runs Rawhide. That's kind of its rolling distro. And then it'll branch off for 40. And then everything becomes 41. And 41/Rawhide just keeps rolling. And when I went to Fedora 40, my install was technically a Rawhide install, not a Fedora 40 install. And so one day I updated and I started getting Fedora 41 packages. So there for a little bit of time, I was running on 41, the real bleeding edge. So I've seen the future, man.
And it's good.
And it's good.
That's what my Fedora still is, because I didn't get off the train quick enough, and looks like I'm riding it for a while.
Yeah. It could be a challenge once you get 41 packages to roll all that back and go back to 40, but it can be done. I've wrangled Fedora DNF multiple times.
Was it broken for you?
Was it what?
What was it broken? Why didn't you stay on it?
No, because you have to choose. There's something you have to set or whatever to say, well, okay, I want to stay on 40, and I didn't do it quick enough, so I'm still on Rawhide.
You still have the install somewhere that's still Rawhide, right? You pull it up from time to time.
But Jonathan, you jumped through hoops to go back to 40.
Well, yes, because it's on my main desktop. I don't actually want to be always running Rawhide. It's better than it used to be, but Rawhide is still scary.
Yeah.
For like a production desktop, Rawhide is still scary.
Tumbleweed's working great, so.
Yeah.
And it's a second boot for me, so if it totally exploded tomorrow, okay, I'll just load something else on.
Yep. That's the way to do it.
You're not dual booting your production system, Jonathan?
Nope. I don't see any point to it. I've got other machines and virtual machines that I can put stuff on if I need to.
Don't test in production.
But what games would you play on that production system?
What games do I play? Goodness. I've been playing Under Rail recently. This feels like it should be a segue, and I'm not sure what we're segueing to.
Exactly.
I think, Rob's got a tip on what game to play.
Is this a game? I think we are ready to get into tips. We're playing something. It's right there in the name.
Well, yes, but there's no game. I mean, you could. You could.
All right, take it away, Rob. Let's start with the command line tips, and Rob is up first.
All right, my tip this week is it's a fun tip, but it's going to be limited to a few people. My tip is UX Play, which I could see how that could have confused some people. So for those watching, on Ubuntu, it's in a lot of other repos. It's actually not in the OpenSUSE repo. There's a GitHub if you're on OpenSUSE and you want to try to figure out how to get that going, but it's in most of the others from what I saw. So put it in Ubuntu. If you're to install, it's the sudo apt install UX Play, and then you want to make sure that you have the other things that it needs. And I already did, but those would be sudo apt install gstreamer 1.0 -plugin -bad, and then also gstreamer 1.0 -libav. And once you have those in there, all you have to do is run UX Play, and then you go over to your iPhone or iPad. Here, I'm going to use this iPad right here, and I'm going to hit screen mirror, and it's popping up right here. And right there, I'm mirroring my screen into Ubuntu.
Oh, cool.
So all I had to do to do this, I swipe down in the top right there, and I go to the screen mirror, and that UX Play at Kubuntu, because this is a Kubuntu install, but not 6.0. I just clicked it, and as easy as it was there, it showed up. And you just run your apps there. And, you know, if you want to demo something or whatever reason you want to mirror your iPad or whatever iOS device onto Ubuntu, UX Play is the way to do it. And here's a game. There you go. I'll do a game.
Nice. Does it let you go the other way to push data from your laptop to the iPad?
As in, like, interact on it?
No. Share your screen from your Linux laptop to the iPad.
We'll get into that in the future.
Okay.
But this app does not do that.
Okay. That is just for me, Rob. That would actually be really nice. I do have an iPad, and I have a use case where it would be really nice to be able to throw stuff from the laptop screen onto the iPad. So when you come with that command line tip, I will tell you all about my use case.
And we do have a question in the chat of how's the latency?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It's not too bad. I don't know. I mean, for you watching, I don't know, maybe you can't see, I guess. That's
not bad. That's pretty good.
Not horrible. I mean, it's not, I don't know. It's not high speed first person shooter. Good.
No Twitch FPSs on it.
No, probably not.
Fun. All right, let's see who's up next. Jeff.
As much talking as I've done, this one's going to be short, but it actually is a command line tip this week.
Mm-hmm.
It's CD space dash. So I was trying to compile OpenWRT for a router I've got, and I was going down about 6 directories doing something, then I'd have to go back up to the root directory to do more stuff. Well, I'm thinking there's got to be a way to just bop back and forth without having to, CD space .. / ad nauseum. Well, that's where the dash comes in. So if you type CD dash, it takes you to the last directory you were in. So if I'm in my directory where I'm going to compile something, and then I have to go down 6, subdirectories down to do something, if I do CD dash, it takes me right back to the top. If I do cd dash again, it takes me down to the bottom. So it will let you switch between directories instantaneously. The last directory, it always goes back to the last directory. So it kind of helps jumping around that way.
No, very good. There's probably a lot of CD tricks that we haven't talked about. Like CD space just takes you back to your home folder. It's another really useful one that I use all the time. I did not know about CD space dash. I will have to keep that in my toolbox.
I didn't know CD space did. I always done CD space tilde, but you could just do CD space.
Yeah. In fact, you may not even need the space. I don't know.
You don't need the space. You just hit CD and then hit return. It takes you to your home directory.
Yeah. So
I
CD,
use that one all the time.
Change directory without a target just takes you to your home directory. Cool.
But I didn't know about the dash either. I was like, yeah, oh, that's cool.
All right, Ken, continue our spring. Unmute yourself, and then let's continue our spring cleaning.
All right. Well, this is going to be giving you some ideas on how to remove old apps and packages that you may have installed. We've talked in the past about using history to look at your history of your commands, and then using grep to filter out stuff from that by piping history into grep. Well, one of the options you're going to use for finding old applications that you may have installed would be to pipe your history through grep and search for, in my case, apt install, or even just using Nala history to look at what I've used installed via Nala. If you're on one of the distributions that uses RPMs, you can use Hackman space dash capital QET. If you're not sure which package manager you're using, you could also use grep and in quotes put space install space and then put a log file you want to look through. In my example, I gave /var/log/dpkg.log.1. Or as Rob had mentioned previously, you can use zgrep to look into archived logs. And there again, I give an example using /var/log/dpkg.log.2.gz. This way you can find those, what applications you may have installed, go through them, and you see some that you're no longer using, then you can use sudo apt remove in the program name, or whatever package manager removal option for removing. And you may find that actually gives you more disk space.
Cool. Some neat stuff there. So I will mention one that I got to use a few weeks ago. Actually, I was in trying to do something weird, as I often do. So in my case, I was actually doing a platform IO build for building native code, which this is kind of a hack in and of itself. Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking firmware that's made to run on like ESP32 devices and making them run that firmware on a Linux machine. Well, somebody had added a function, but it required some libs that were only available on Ubuntu. So I wanted a way to check for whether these libs were available. And then essentially what you would do is set a build flag based on what that returned. And so I got to looking at how could you do this, and the answer was package config, pkg-config, and it's a command line. It's actually I think it's part of GNU Make, that the whole library of tools. But what it does is it checks your system for whether libraries are installed. And so in my case, I was doing a pkg-config --libs. libulfius was the library that was, as far as I could tell, sort of only available on Ubuntu. It's not available on Fedora. And so running that and then a -- silence errors. And so if that library is installed, what it's going to give you is the build flag to include it. And if it's not installed, it's not going to return anything. And this is actually where I also got that or null from, because if it didn't return anything, it would technically return an error, and then the entire build script would crash out, and that's not what we wanted to do. So this took a while to figure out how to do this inside of a platform IO build file, because it's not made for building native stuff. And so it took a while to come up with this. I'm sort of proud that it boils down to like 2 lines of code. So if you need it, you really need it. Package config. It's a fun little tool. All right. I think that's it. I think that's the show. Let's each of you guys get the last word. Plug something if you want to. Let's start with Rob.
All right. So as usual, my website is robertpcampbell.com, and on there you can find links to my LinkedIn, my Mastodon, and a place to buy me a coffee. Now, last week I gave you guys a challenge, and that was 5,000 coffees to get me a
new car.
New car. That's what it was. To get me a new car.
It's a new car.
You guys really came out there strong. And I actually had somebody who donated me 5 coffees. It's not 5,000, but
cool.
5 coffees. That's $45 US, which is pretty amazing. So thank you, Mark, for the 5 coffees. I will enjoy them. I won't be getting a car. With all these, I almost might have enough for a cheap bicycle, but it's still it's amazingly appreciated. 5 coffees, really awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right, Jeff.
Nothing too much to say. So Poetry Corner, server's poor response, not quick enough for browser, timed out Plum Blossom. Have a great week, everybody.
And Ken.
Well, this week, Cousin of Jaw asked if the iVentory PXE server had been discussed. Looking through the command line tips spreadsheet we maintain, I know we discussed Ventory, the open source tool to create a single bootable USB drive that allows you to select from multiple ISOs when booting. But after doing some research, I found out Ventory's maintainer, Long Panda, started a new project, iVentory, to support booting and installing any OS over your local network, PXE server. I found an article written by Martin Brinkman for ghacks.net that gives a quick overview. Cousin Ajah, this is the first time to my knowledge that we are discussing it. Thank you for giving us this tip. It could be what a distro hopper needs to change the distro on each boot. Rob, you accept the challenge?
I've already been playing around with it, and I got a line up for next week's tip, so you'll be able to see it live on the show. It's
cool.
Pretty sweet little tool.
Yeah, it looks fun. It's sort of making me think I need to set one up, a little iVentory network up myself. That could be really useful.
The only disadvantage
today.
The only disadvantage is that the free version doesn't support the ARM64 architecture.
Yep.
But it's only $45 per version.
Yeah.
Only 5 coffees.
Well, I wonder, what can you use it with SpinRite?
Probably. It'd probably be possible. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. It was a lot of fun. I want to say thanks to everyone that watched both live and on the download later. We sure appreciate it. Tell a friend about the show. Get your geeky on and tell them about the Untitled Linux Show. If you want to follow my work, of course, there's Hackaday, hackaday.com. The security column I do goes live every Friday morning. And then on Wednesdays, we do Floss Weekly and have a lot of fun there. This next week on Floss Weekly, we're actually talking to a security company that made one of their security products open source, and really interested to chat with them about that. Poutine is the name of the product. Pretty cool stuff. yeah, you can follow me if you want to, JP_Bennett over on the social network that used to be known as Twitter. And there's the YouTube channel as well, which I haven't done anything there for a few weeks. I need to crank out another YouTube video. But anyway, it's all fun. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for being here. And we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.